Oh, hello there. You seem to have caught me with my spear in hand, dude. Now, what if I told you that spears are among the slowest weapon types in Elden Ring? Don't believe me? Well, I guess I'll just have to show you. So as I'm sure you guys have just seen in the intro right there, dude, the vast majority of weapons in the game swing faster on neutral R1 attacks than spears do. There are only two weapon types that swing slower than spear does, which is incredibly sad, dude. But we'll get into which ones those are right now. So both the one and two-handed neutral R1s of chop halberds, respectively, clock in at frame 20, one whole frame slower than spears. As well as, particularly singling this out too, because the one-handed neutral R1 of the sweeping halberd moveset here is equivalent in speed to spear at frame 19, but the two-handed is indeed one frame slower, coming in at frame 20. And the only other weapon type in the game that has a slower neutral R1 attack than spears is specifically one-handed whip. Its one-handed neutral R1 clocks in at frame 20 as well. It's funny too because the two-handed is frame 18, which is actually one frame faster than spear, right? So, yeah, dude, spear is in desperate need of some speed improvements, particularly on its neutral game, dude, because there is no reason that a spear should be swinging slower than things like a colossal sword, be equivalent speed to a colossal weapon, for fuck's sake, dude. Like, what? What are we talking about here, dude? And as you guys saw in the intro too, one of the worst things of all is that the neutral R1 speed of a great spear, both one and two-handed, is equivalent in speed to a one-handed and two-handed neutral R1 of spear, right? That should never be the case, where you have the supposedly, lighter and more dexterous version of the weapon type being the same speed as its great version, right? It just, it don't make no sense, dude. It does not compute, in other words. So, we'll move on to the next portion of the video, dude. Woo! I think one of the next most important aspects to mention in relation to spears is talking about the power stance moveset, right? Because for anybody who's ever played PvP, especially in the early days, knows that power stance spears was one of the strongest setups in the entire game. Of course, it has since now been nerfed multiple times, of course, to its tracking, damage, and its overall output. But one thing that they did keep the same and didn't touch is the speed of the L1, right? And The L1 speed sits at a very respectable frame 15 right now, which I think is the perfect benchmark to base the one and two-handed speeds of the neutral R1s at, right? Either frame 16 or frame 15 respectively. Somewhere in that area would just be absolutely fucking exceptional, dude. You know, and it's exactly what spears need. They need to be a little bit quicker, dude. That's the only thing that they're missing to be perfectly viable, you know? So, having said that, I think this is the perfect opportunity to also mention that most of the spears in Elden Ring are extremely, extremely short, dude. You know, like you look at, obviously, its namesake right here, dude, the short spear. It is indeed short, right? And like even things like the iron spear, the normal spear, the partisan, Clayman's harpoon, spike spear, you know, all of these kind of like medium to short range spears, especially things like the clean rot spear, right? All of which I think should be at least 1 to 2 frames faster than the rest of the spears, right? When or if they get buffed, right? Because it's like something like the pike or, you know, some of the more longer ranged ones like bolt of Grandsax, things like that, right? I think somewhere around the area of frame 16 to 15, like I was talking about before. Obviously, you could lump Cross-Naginata into that category as well, but some of these very, very small spears, I think should probably be frame 14, you know, just to give them a little bit more reason to exist and a reason to use a shorter spear instead of just, oh, hey, dude, you know, like the longer spears are always going to be the play because the shorter spears are just inherently worse and they have no benefit to using them over the longer ones, right? So I just figured it was a good time to mention that, and I think that would be a really, really cool change for them to implement too, to help all of the spears have more of an identity, you know? And just to reinforce that point that I'm making in relation to all that spears need is just a little bit more speed, man. The power stance moveset is beautiful. Frame 15. That's what we need for the one and two-handed moveset, as stated before. But another thing that's very fascinating is if you take a look at this, the shield poking animation for Spear, would you believe me if I told you, dude, that the shield poke animation for Spears sits at frame 13, dude? You know, like, and when this massive amount of discrepancy exists for all of these neutral based attacks, where, oh yeah, dude, you're dealing with a 4 frame discrepancy between power stancing. Swinging 2 fucking spears at once is 4 frames faster than swinging 1. And poking with a shield is 6 frames faster than swinging with it one-handed. Something's off with this picture, dude, you know? And I really hope that From Software is able to rectify said discrepancies, dude. So with that being said, let's move on to the next portion of the video, dude. Yo! Alright guys, so having touched on the speed disparities, even within its own frame data, right? It gets worse. It gets so much worse, dude. As we'll touch on here, the R2 attacks of spears would be decent, you know? And they were, in comparison to most of the other weapon types for the longest time. But if you guys are familiar, in patch 1.14, we received R2 speed improvements. And the vast majority of weapon types in the game received R2 speed adjustments. And one of them, as such, is great spears. And as we talked about before already, Great Spear's neutral R1 attacks are also frame 19, the same as Spears. Which, if that wasn't already unfortunate enough, Great Spears received the R2 speed improvements in patch 1.14, and now you have a situation like this, where the normal Spear R2, uncharged, is frame 26, right? And then you go over to Great Spears R2s. Great Spear R2s are now frame 22. So not only, as we've just stated, dude, Great Spears are the same speed as Spears, which is asinine, but now Great Spears have faster R2 attacks than their lighter counterpart. Why, FromSoft? Why? I think now is a good time to focus on what could have been, dude, and just talk about the potential that had Spears received those R2 changes, that single-handedly would have made up for all of the other lack of buffs and speed improvements that we've been talking about thus far in the video, right? Like, you look at something like the Partisan R2, right, here for example, and the 1 and 2-handed is a big horizontal sweep, right? Which, its main advantage is, once again, Spear's main weakness is strafing. And now you have a beautiful anti-strafe tool that also has type 2 hit stun associated with it. And look at the early hit shenanigans that you can fucking do, dude, you know? Like, turning it so it hits on the earliest possible frame. And the sheer amount of mix potential that you can place upon your opponent, dude, when you have a tool like this, dude, had it received those R2 changes, man, it just would have been in such a great spot, dude. And like the release window is amazing on the vast majority of these unique Spear R2s already. It's just trimming the startup frames that would single-handedly make Spears a very viable pick and a really good weapon in terms of PvP, you know? And obviously, you know, I don't necessarily want to focus on one aspect over the other, but like even in a PvE context, that would make Spears feel so much better to use, period. Across the board, dude. But that aside, dude, you know, you look at all of these different Spear R2s. You look at the short Spear R2, dude, you know? If the startup frames got trimmed off of this, dude, you would just be fucking, you know, dishing out your dexterous pokies, dude, left and right. And then also, too, the first or the second swing of the first R2 here on this double swing actually does deal type 2 hit stun. So it's like if you do land that, you could set up like a charged mix up there, you know? Because like you get that extra swing when you do the fully charged, right? So yeah, there's so much here, dude, you know? And like even when we're looking at something like this, like the Smith script spear, dude, you know, this thing deserves to have a little bit better fucking R2 here, man. You know, it already costs like 18 million stamina to be able to swing this in the first place. Like, look at this shit, dude. Look at that. Look at the stamina cost on that shit, man. It deserves to be a little bit quicker than that. And plus, dude, the Smithscript Spear is one of the worst Smithscript weapons out of the bunch. So, giving it a little bit of a bonus there, dude, you know? Realistically, the only thing this thing is really fucking useful for is the fact that it has the Throne R2 when you're riding it on horseback, right? Which is extremely cool, but just using it baseline should feel a little bit better, right? And hell, dude, look at the Pike unique R2s. They're already decent where they're at right now, particularly because the Pike specifically has a extremely long release to uncharge window, right? So there's a really long period where you can decide to release the R2 before you actually get to the fully charged animation, right? And that is phenomenal, dude, for roll catching people and reaction roll catching, making them panic roll on the startup of it, and then just releasing it to get that beautiful, beautiful roll catch, dude. The other thing I wanted to mention as well is imagine the R2 vortexing, dude, that we would have if it got the R2 speed improvements, dude. Like, this R2 has anti-air capabilities, both one and two-handed, right? So it's like that completely eradicates and takes away that option for the person being hit by it, right? So you just have so much mix-up potential, so much variance in when you can decide to let this go. Not only that, but when you do hit somebody with either the one-handed or two-handed R2, if you do the follow-up and they decide to panic roll out, the follow-up R2 catches their back roll, dude. So it's like, it's so fucking good, dude. Not to mention that these R2s have significantly more range than you think they do, especially when you free aim them downward. So good, dude, you know? If we would have gotten those R2 changes, man, it would have single-handedly made so many of these spears viable just off of that basis alone. So, a couple of additional points that I wanted to mention, dude, before we move on, and it's in relation to the baseline spear R2, which I forgot to break down and cover. So, looking at this, there is a unique property associated with the two-handed fully charged, right? And as you see here, it has so much forward momentum and forward motion tied to it, right? And you can imagine if this R2 got the speed improvements, you could have had a very interesting scenario here, dude, where you have this incredibly fast neutral R2, right? With type 2 hit stun, no less, so when you land that, you could set up for a mix-up with crouching R1, you could go into like a jumping attack, you could do whatever the hell you wanted, block cancel into a neutral R1, right? But even beyond that, dude, like I mentioned earlier with the pike, spears have a extremely large release to uncharged window where you can mix your opponent massively, dude, with that variance in charge timing. And especially with a R2 like this, dude, with this amount of forward momentum associated with it, you would have mix-up city when it comes to that two-handed R2, right? And just to round out the point here, the one-handed R2, you can see how fucking slow that is, dude. Look at how many startup frames this has that you're forced to sit through for an uncharged R2. It's like, why, man? You know, even looking at the uncharged two-handed R2, it doesn't have that much startup frames associated with it, right? So every single one of these R2s that I've just showcased, man, so much potential just left on the cutting room floor. And I personally can't think of any logical reason as to why From Software decided to leave them out from the R2 improvements, because they desperately need it, dude, you know? And I can't understand how From Software looked at one of the fastest R2s in the entire game, you know, that being dagger R2s, and they were like, "Oh yeah, yeah, those need to be faster. Spears? Nah, they're fine, dude. That's one of the best R2s in the game right there." So it's just like, nah, man. You know, they need help, dude, and it's sad that spears missed their time in the sun, basically. Whether that was out of a situation where From Software was worried about buffing spears because of how strong power stance spears have been throughout the duration of the game's life cycle, or any other weird reason, dude, you know? But regardless of any of that, dude, you know, the point still stands. Spears should have definitely gotten the R2 improvements, man. And it's very, very sad that they didn't. So, let's hope for buffs in the Tarnished Edition pre-patch, dude. Please, oh please, let me see it. Woo! In this next segment here, we're going to be taking a look at the spears that have the unique R1 movesets associated with them, that being the Cross-Naginata and, of course, the Swift Spear, which we will get to in a bit. But breaking down some of the unique properties that are associated with the Cross-Naginata here, of course, you have this vertical downward swipe, which has that anti-air property associated with it. So when it comes to PvP, this thing would be an absolute menace, dude, if it was just a little bit faster. Basically taking away your ability to have neutral jumping as a answer to facing this weapon, right? And that's something that is very important when discussing spears, because traditionally, spear movesets are extremely weak to jumps. They're all thrusting-based attacks. They're super weak to being strafed, super weak to jumping, right? So that's where something like the Cross-Naginata comes in. It kind of gets rid of that weakness, and then also, it gives you an exceptional backswing, dude. You see that beautiful poke coming out, dude, afterward. And the R1 cancels after most of the augmented based R1 attacks. So, like the running attacks, the jumping attacks, the crouching attacks, all have a very short cancel window into that follow up R1 press. And once again, you can imagine, dude, if the neutral R1s got sped up just a tiny little bit, like this thing would become an absolute monster. And that is a world that I do indeed want to live in, dude. With that being said, I think we'll move on over to the Swift Spear. Alright guys, let's break down some of the unique quirks and properties that the Swift Spear, my beloved, has, dude. So, starting out here, I wanted to mention that the two-handed specifically, and this is isolated to the two-handed for some reason, I'm not sure why, but the frameability and the tracking that the two-handed R1 moveset has is just absolutely insane, as you can see here. Almost full 360-degree frameability on every single portion of the attack chain there, but the chain finisher, of course. But yeah, dude, you know, like two-handed Swift Spear would have a shit ton of potential, dude, you know, if it was just a little bit faster. And of course, we have to cover the one-handed. And this is what I was talking about earlier, which is kind of weird to me that the one-handed is not only slower than the two-handed, but it also has significantly worse frameability and tracking in comparison to the two-handed. So like I'll try and turn this as much as I can at the start of the animation, and you can see it only goes past the 180 mark, right? And you look at the follow-up here, when you try and frame that, that is just like, that's rough, dude, you know? Like you barely get past the 180 point yet again. And unfortunately, that's not where the sadness stops for the one-handed Swift Spear either, because in patch 1.14, the Swift Spear received a nerf to all of its cancel windows, dude, for some odd reason. And upon further investigation, I came to the conclusion that they must have done this because the neutral R1, one-handed, for offhand and main hand Swift Spear, when the second portion of the first R1 hit breaks passive poison PvP, it deals type 2 hit stun. And it still does in the game currently. And I imagine that was resulting in some true combos with certain weapons, right? And From Software saw this, they wanted to rectify the true combo existence, and what they did was a very poor change, in my opinion, as to fixing that issue. Because when you take away the swiftness factor of the cancel windows for the Swift Spear, you're taking away a piece of what makes the weapon so cool and so unique and so special to solve a problem that could have been solved in a way better way. If the concern is to remove the true combos, then I think the idyllic solution would be to remove the type 2 hit stun off of the second hit of the first R1. Then you preserve the swiftness of the cancel windows while removing the quote unquote issue of it having true combos associated with it, right? So I would definitely like to see that going forward. I would like to see that change made to one-handed Swift Spear. It might be a dream, but it's my dream, dude. Here's to hoping. But yeah, I think that covers the unique properties that I wanted to cover in relation to the Swift Spear. So let's dive into the nitty-gritty now, dude. The Swift Spear is only swift when compared to the normal spear moveset, which in fact, the two-handed first hit of the neutral R1 clocks in at frame 16, but one-handed, the first hit lands at frame 17, which, you know what else? You know what else's active frames start at frame 17? Thrusting halberd, one-handed. Um, Not very swift on the swift spear's part, dude. If your first swing of your swift combo chain, dude, is as fast as a halberd neutral R1 is. So, laying that out in that way, it needs a little bit of help, dude, you know? So, we'll head on over to the Frame Data Explorer, and we'll break this down in a little bit more detail. Alright, so as you can see here, dude, the Swift Spear, the two-handed neutral R1 here, the first attack is at frame 16, right? Only two active frames there. And then the final hit, the one that actually deals the bulk of the poise damage, or should, rather, is frame 24, which is unbelievably slow, especially when you take a look at other weapons with a similar design structure. So two-handed twin blade here, for example, the first hit comes in at frame 11, dude, and the second one comes out at frame 18, which is the same frame that the first attack's active frames are ending on the Swift Spear. Once again, something's wrong with this picture, dude. You know? So, just using that as a benchmark, dude, the Swift Spear, you know, especially if the other spears get buffed in terms of speed, the Swift Spear definitely needs to be significantly faster than it is now, right? So if all of the other baseline spear movesets get brought down to, let's just say, frame 16, where the Swift Spear first active frames start, then the Swift Spear first attack, at the very least, I think needs to be brought down to frame 14, but realistically, I think it should sit somewhere between frame 12 and frame 13, you know? And then obviously there is okay, so frame 24 and frame 18. So there is a 6 frame discrepancy in between. So if it gets brought down to frame 12 for the first hit, then we'd be seeing this at frame 20 respectively, right? Which would be a very nice change, I think, for Swift Spear, you know? And obviously you can do a very similar thing with the one-handed moveset neutral R1s as well, which, like I said earlier, sit at frame 17, so the one-handed is even a little bit slower than the two-handed neutral R1 is, right? So I think that wraps up everything that I wanted to touch on in relation to the frame data side of things. So we'll move on to the next segment here. Well, alright guys, I think that covers everything that I wanted to in today's video, dude. Hopefully you guys found this topic engaging, fun, and overall a good listen, dude. I really do appreciate you guys taking the time. After all, dude, you know, the old Frost man is super passionate about spears, dude. They've always been my main in each and every one of From Software's games, and being that they're so incredibly atrocious in Elden Ring, I had to shed a little light on this, dude. So I suppose I'll pass it over to my future self for the goodbyes. And with that, my friends, this video comes to a close, dude. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to sit back and watch and indulge the old Frostman on this topic that I'm really, really passionate about, dude, you know, because I really want spears to be the best that they can be, dude. And I think that that potential's there coming with the Tarnished Edition. So, with all that being said, if you guys enjoyed today's video, feel free to drop a like, subscribe, dude, and let me know what you think down in the comments, dude. I'm very interested to hear what you guys have to say. So, I'll see you guys next time, dude. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye for now, my friends.